And welcome back. On this program, we've been covering the alarming increase in sex trafficking online, especially when it comes to children. The numbers, they are beyond disturbing. Last year, technology companies reported 45 million online photos and videos of child sexual abuse. Now, just a decade ago, that number was less than a million. That includes things like child pornography, rape, torture, and things with details, frankly, too disturbing and disgusting for us to talk about. Now, a personal injury attorney of all people in Houston is going after Facebook and the other big tech companies using a novel approach that challenges a federal law that grants some immunity to those companies. That attorney, Annie McAdams, she joins us to explain. There's been, to me at least, Annie, only a couple of examples that I can think of. We've talked a lot in this program about the unending gun violence epidemic in this country, and especially with the folks in Connecticut so close to us and the tragedy that happened at Sandy Hook. The gun industry is about the only industry that there is that's immunized for what their product, guns, specific guns, for what happens to them through the course of purchase and then use, and obviously deadly consequences. And while they have that carve out in the law, it certainly seems like big tech gets that same kind of protection. I know it's not specifically, like we said, carved for them, but in reality, don't they have that same kind of blanket protection, and that's what you're going after?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, in addition to the gun industry, big tech is one of the other only industries that has enjoyed a certain level of blanket immunity. And they pull that immunity through what I believe to be a distortion of the Communications Decency Act, specifically Section 230 of the CDA.
Explain what Section 230 is, because I think it gets to the root of where they've always been able to say, after some of the horrors that we've talked about that have been going online, and the Times has really been spending a lot of focus on the last couple of weeks here, where they can just say Section 230, not our problem, people do what they're going to do, can't look to us to police it.
Right. So the Communications Decency Act was really back in 1996. Our country said, here we are starting out with the development of the internet. What type of internet do we want as a country? Well, back in 1996, that answer was very different than it is today. In 1996, we wanted to make sure that America's tech companies were going to become and stay and remain the leaders in technological advancement. We did not want to bog down tech companies with having to defend against multiple defamation cases and things. And or in addition, one of the main purposes of the Communications Decency Act, specifically Section 230, was how do we empower these tech companies to grow in a safe manner and not be held accountable for policing some of this content. And very quickly we saw some original findings from the court applying it to defamation cases. Subsequent to that, we saw it step by step be further extended to tort issues and granting really broad immunity. The first crack we saw in that immunity was in the Ninth Circuit, actually, in California.
You're trying a different approach here than has been done before. Really, a product liability argument here that, hey, and I think you used the analogy in the article I read. If somebody's making a lawnmower and a blade flies off, and obviously harms somebody, you can't keep making the product the same way. You have to fix the product here because now you know about the potential risks that it poses, or else you got some real exposure here, rightfully so. By now, these tech companies know about some of the tragedies that are happening, a lot of times to minors as a consequence of basically their portal that they're providing some really horrible people with horrible intentions.
Absolutely. I mean, Facebook does not dispute that sex trafficking is a problem that they are aware of on their product. They understand and admit in response to my lawsuits that their product is used quite frequently in sex trafficking and the facilitation of sex trafficking. And the law is pretty clear. If you create a product that is inherently dangerous and you fail to warn of that danger or fail to design it in a manner and which is safe for use, then you're held responsible for that. CDA and the evolution of the CDA has allowed us to advance past initial stages of dismissals against Facebook based on Communications Decency Act exceptions to immunity.
You know, as you referenced, Zuckerberg testified before Congress that he's responsible for what goes on Facebook. But, you look at other things, Backpage, that's basically a site, as I understand it, that's set up for pimps to prostitute women out there, and everybody seems to know it, but this giant blind eye is turned. So consequently, how come if he's saying, yeah, the buck stops with me, the buck really doesn't stop with him?
Well, the arrogance is almost suffocating to some degree. I actually sat right here in my office and watched his testimony in April in 2018. At that time, we had already started to screen our sex trafficking cases geared towards Facebook's knowing facilitation or knowingly benefiting from the facilitation. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter to me or really to our communities who are dealing with the epic, significant losses that these victims are suffering from when you're just doing a little bit or if your site's completely geared towards it. I'm going to say that the safety of our kids is just simply not negotiable. And if Facebook is even in a limited area or even to some degree facilitating sex trafficking, well then they're just as guilty as Backpage is. There's really no distinction to me.
Annie, about a week ago, I spoke to a one-time victim of sex abuse where she was lured through the internet and a guy captured her, subsequently tortured her, and thank God she was rescued. But then it came out in that expose that the fractional resources that law enforcement has and the technological wherewithal they have to combat what is an industry that's exploding of these pedophiles that are almost requiring additional new content to be created where children are being victimized. And it's all being done, obviously, through the internet. To that end, we know about the problem. We know that law enforcement can't combat it alone. Is there any validity to the argument that, the Zuckerbergs or the rest of the world say, listen, if they can't even control it, how can you expect me to control it? We're just the facilitator. We don't create the content, we create the platform.
Well, Richard, you make a great point. Fighting sex trafficking is hard enough in this country without America's best and brightest tech talent helping these traffickers reach their victims. One of the things that we have to look at is back when people would want to purchase sex, they would have to leave their home. They would have to go to certain particular maybe clubs, or they'd have to go out on the street, out in the open, and negotiate the purchase of sex. And with the advent of tech and the development of this, it is now a simple transaction where you can shop online and it's delivered to your door. We have to keep pace with how crimes evolve. And I think that that's what's so critical about our cases is this the very first time civil justice has been able to step up, stand next to law enforcement and say, you're not in this fight alone. You can hold the Johns responsible in a criminal trial. You can hold the traffickers responsible in a criminal trial. But there's one piece of this puzzle that continues to get by without being held accountable. And that's been the role that tech and even the hospitality industry has played. And so this is the very first time that civil justice is stepping in and saying, wait a minute, these other participants who are benefiting from this must be held accountable. And the way that we do that is civil justice.
Well, I know you got multiple cases going. You don't expect that this is going to be a quick fight, let alone an easy one. This could take a better part of a decade by your own words. I think you figured it out. The right way to do this and the only way to do this is to hit somebody in the pocketbook hard enough that they're going to change their business practices, not out of morality, but out of necessity. And I can't wish you more luck. I really hope you crack through on this thing because God knows we need it. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Richard.
And we'll be back to wrap things up.